Hello, honeys, and welcome to the fall season, I guess. I don't know about for you all, but it has been firmly in the 60s here in Madison, and I'm so happy to be experiencing seasonal changes again. I can't tell you all how much I missed fall. We have here, as always, your headlines, your most important information about the arts world's goings-on of the last week. Quick reminder that with this episode, as with all our Beesnesses, there is a source doc available for your review in the episode description. But let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. First things first, our follow-ups, and we are once again talking about the Bayeux Tapestry, this time a petition to block its loan to London's British Museum, which garnered 50,000 signatures in the last couple months. The appeal was launched in July by the French art historian Didier Reichner and cites warnings from textile restorers who said that transporting the 1,000-year-old tapestry could damage its embroidered linen fabric. Reichner has experience enough in this area of petitioning to say that while the current signature amount will not stop the loan, they have a whole year to make it to that threshold. Reichner is, after all, the one behind the petition to block the commission of contemporary stained glass windows for 6 chapels in Paris's restored Notre Dame Cathedral, which racked up 294,000 signatures, but ultimately was not successful in stopping the replacement of Eugène Violet de Luxe 19th century windows. For more on that petition and story, please see other prior Beesnesses. What's important to note here is just how many prominent French cultural figures have spoken out against moving the tapestry at all. These include the former director of the Bayeux Tapestry Museum, Isabelle Attard, who told the art newspaper, quote, "I think the tapestry must not be transported for several reasons. Its value is incalculable, and if anything happens to it, no amount of money and no other similar object can replace it," end quote. And Michael Daly, the director of the conservation watchdog Artwatch UK, even told The Telegraph, quote, "What's particularly concerning about moving works of art about is that they are so intrinsically vulnerable and susceptible to injuries caused by any number of possible or likely mishaps, knocks, vibrations, being dropped, fluctuations of temperature and humidity, and so forth, and of even being lost altogether," end quote. With the pressure mounting, we'll see what ends up happening here if they go forward with this loan. We also learned that a Barbara Hepworth sculpture will remain in the UK after £3.8 million, or $5.2 million US, was raised to stop its export. The wood and string object, known as Sculpture with Color, Oval Form, Pale Blue and Red from 1943, will become part of the UK's national collection and go on permanent public display at the Hepworth Wakefield Museum, who co-raised that amount with the Art Fund. As we previously covered, the British government placed the sculpture under a temporary export ban to give a museum in the country the opportunity to raise the funds necessary to acquire the work and thus keep it in the nation after it sold at Christie's London last March. A combination of donations and grants allowed them to just beat the ban's deadline of August 27th. Olivia Colling, the Hepworth Wakefield's interim director and CEO, stated, quote, "Barbara Hepworth often talked about her need to be a part of a community and its proactive development. We think she would have been delighted that so many people have come together to enable her work to be a part of a public art collection which can be experienced and enjoyed by so many," end quote. We also learned the Getty Foundation has granted $1.5 million to 7 Black Visual Arts archives as part of its ongoing Black Visual Arts Archives program. The program is cool in the sense that it accepts grant application inquiries regarding the initiative on an ongoing basis. But some of the 2025 recipients include the Amistad Research Center of New Orleans, Clark Atlanta University, Lincoln University of Pennsylvania, the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum in D.C., and the Visual Aids in New York. The headline caught our attention because the Getty here specifically partnered with professional consultant and archivist specializing in Black archives, Dominique Luster, to help the grantees launch their projects. This also brings the Getty's total funding for the multi-year program, aiming to increase access to archival collections, particularly those with information about work created by Black artists, to $2.6 million, even at a time when this sort of initiative has been under serious presidential and political threat. Yet it remains crucial work, says Miguel de Baca, senior program officer at the Getty Foundation, quote, "We need a fuller understanding of the influence of Black artists, architects, and cultural institutions to tell a more complete history of American art and culture, and we can work towards achieving this by investing in Black archives, end quote. A new study publicized last week says rising sea levels and coastal flooding threaten Rapa Nui's moai statues. Published in the Journal of Cultural Heritage, the study says that rising sea levels will impact areas of the Chilean UNESCO World Heritage Site by 2080 and so threaten at least 51 culturally significant objects there, including the famed moai statues created by a native Polynesian group over 500 years ago. Researchers from the University of Hawaii at Manoa used advanced computer models to simulate the waves along the coastline and mapped projected flooding with future sea levels atop geospatial layers, with the location of cultural assets provided by local partners. Quote, "This research reveals a critical threat to the living culture and livelihood of Rapa Nui. Failure to address this threat could ultimately endanger the island's UNESCO World Heritage Site status," end quote. And that's partially why we found this story worth reporting on, honeys, is that the team, along with local Rapa Nui, will use these discoveries to prepare a mitigation plan to safeguard cultural heritage in these areas in the future as the study, quote, "provides the specific urgent data needed to incentivize community discussion and planning for the future," end quote. Archaeologists have also uncovered a quote-unquote extraordinary 3,000-year-old mural in Peru. The nearly 20-foot-long artwork was found at the Huaca Yolanda site in La Libertad, an area distinguished by its indigenous cultural heritage, and it's a remnant of an interior ceremonial temple space dating back more than 3,000 years. Local archaeologists stated that it bears traces of vibrantly colored paint plus, quote, "previously unknown decorative techniques and symbolic imagery," end quote, and requires increased protection measures by authorities as the area faces urgent preservation threats of looting and damage from agricultural machinery. They are making these public pushes for measures like protective fencing, archaeological conservation, and surveillance as a result. Also last week, a first-of-its-kind comprehensive study of previously discovered 2,000-year-old silver coins may have rewritten the history of trading in Southeast Asia. Led by researchers at the National University of Singapore, the study found commonalities in the coins' weight and metallurgy, which allowed the team to study various groups beyond national boundaries. The findings also confirmed Chinese records from as early as the 2nd century BCE mentioning a trade route that connected politically affiliated groups in Persia and across Southeast Asia. And this is important because, as lead author Andrew Harris told Scientific News Today, quote, "It forces us to think of Southeast Asia not as a collection of isolated kingdoms, but as a dynamic, connected region," end quote. Last week's headlines also told us that Egypt's Alexandria Biennale will return in 2026 after a 12-year hiatus. The 27th edition will be titled "This Too Shall Pass," will be curated by artist Moataz Nasser, who represented Egypt at the 2017 Venice Biennale, and it will gather 55 artists hailing from across the Mediterranean for the main programs. The 2026 edition will therefore restore one of Egypt's marquee art events to global calendars. Nasser told the art newspaper that the 2027 edition will, as our sources say, quote, "maintain its founding spirit of regional solidarity, but will be open in some capacity to artists from other countries," end quote, even as it reflects Alexandria's status as the cultural and commercial capital of the ancient Mediterranean, with some of the programs and exhibitions being hosted in local ancient buildings. We also learned that contemporary artist Micheline Thomas was accused of harassment and non-payment by her ex-fiancé. Thomas, who is renowned for her multimedia works, mostly of Black women, faces allegations that she fostered a, quote, "abusive work environment," end quote, and mismanaged money brought in by her former romantic partner and the plaintiff in this suit, the art consultant, curator, and Real Housewives of New York cast member Raquel Sheffermont, in a legal filing last week. The pair coupled up in 2011 and quickly became a celebrity couple by the time Thomas gained repute in the art world the following year. They co-created the advisory and art show platform Deux Femmes Noires together, which focuses on women and artists of color, though the pair split up in 2020. Chevron made her accusations public in a summons filed in the Supreme Court of New York on August 8th and is seeking at least $10 million plus interest and attorney's fees. She has yet, however, to submit a detailed complaint as part of this case. Chevron has alleged that in addition to not properly paying her for completed work, Thomas had, quote, "illegally diverted significant funds and business opportunities," end quote, that Chevron had helped engineer. The summons also claims that Thomas, quote, "repeatedly and improperly pressured Miss Chevron to resume their romantic relationship and ultimately terminated Miss Chevron's employment," end quote, after their breakup. On a happier note, we learned that a mural honoring immigrants will grace St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York very soon. The 21-foot-high 12-panel work titled "What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding" in reference to the similarly named song popularized by Elvis Costello, depicts the arrival of 19th century and present-day immigrants to New York City. It will be dedicated during a mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral on September 21st. The artwork, which will be painted by Brooklyn-based artist Adam Vianovic, and this headline at large are notable, honeys, because it will be the largest one commissioned in the renowned cathedral's 146-year history, as well as the first since the massive bronze doors at its Fifth Avenue entrance were installed in 1949. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, confirmed that this piece is meant to celebrate the many generations of immigrants that have contributed to New York City's diverse makeup, as well as to honor the city's first responders. Meanwhile, however, the erasure of the Rainbow Memorial for the Pulse shooting victims has raised alarms in Florida. Late in the evening of August 20th, state officials reportedly paved over a multicolored street crossing on Orange Avenue that stood for nearly a decade as a tribute to the 49 people killed in the Orlando mass shooting at Pulse nightclub, who were primarily LGBTQ+ and Latine, the site of which was steps away. This paveover and others follows the passage of new legislation in June that prohibits pavement surface signage and art that is, quote, associated with social, political, or ideological messages or images and does not serve the purpose of traffic control, end quote, which was issued by the administrations of both Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and the sitting president. This legislation has apparently superseded the fact that the city of Orlando purchased the property to erect a permanent memorial to the victims in late 2023. The backlash was, of course, swift and strong. Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer called the removal of the pedestrian crossing a, quote, cruel political act, end quote, in a statement on X, and State Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith, who was the first openly gay Latino official elected to the Florida legislature in 2016, called the erasure of the crossing a, quote, disgusting betrayal in his own X post. Smith went on to say, quote, of course they did this in the middle of the night because they knew what they were doing was wrong, end quote. He, as well as several other residents, used chalk to recolor the street hours after the removal. Last week also saw an announcement from the Mutter Museum regarding its new policy for human remains. The well-known medical history institution run by the College Physicians of Philadelphia has faced bitter controversy over the last couple of years for its removal of all online exhibits and videos in June 2023 as part of an ethical review of its collections. The museum, whose prior tagline was, quote, disturbingly informative, end quote, announced at an August 19th press event that all exhibitions will shift their focus to, quote, the lives of patients and changes in medical history over time, end quote, as our sources say. We decided to include this headline, honeys, because it reflects broader conversations going on across all sorts of institutions about what can and what should be displayed by whom and for whom. For example, the Postmortem Project, a 2-year endeavor involving focus groups, open house meetings, and an interactive exhibit, was the driving force behind the Mutter Museum's new policy. And Sarah Ray, the museum's senior director of interpretation and engagement, stated, quote, this process and ongoing research by our collections team demonstrate that the public debate about whether to exhibit human remains presents a false choice. The question is whether we can exhibit human remains in a way that does justice both to the people whose remains we hold while also doing justice to the public we serve. The answer to this question is yes, end quote. We also learned that a descendant of a Jewish collector has sued Christie's for the whereabouts of Nazi-looted Egan Schiele works. On August 7th, a Czech man by the name of Miloš Vavra filed a petition against Christie's in New York Supreme Court demanding the auction house disclose the ownership and location of several blue-chip artworks once belonging to the Jewish cabaret performer Franz Friedrich or Fritz Grunbaum, who was killed by Nazis, and which Vavra claims are involved in, quote, a non-disclosure agreement with a purported family in Switzerland seeking to auction artworks looted from the Grunbaum collection, end quote, according to Art News. Vavra is a confirmed descendant of Grunbaum, who had previously received 50% of the sales proceeds from auctions of several restituted works by the famed Austrian expressionist, which were auctioned by Christie's. He wants this information disclosed so that he can file claims on the artwork prior to the expiration of the Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act, or HEAR Act, of 2016 in late 2026. His petition included one email from attorney Dennis Glazer on July 16th and another from Eileen Brankovic, Christie's international business director, in its restitution department, sent to Vavra's attorney on July 21st. Those emails claimed that experts at Christie's had seen 3 of the contested works and described 2 as being, quote, among the highest quality and potentially most valuable, end quote, works by Schiele they'd ever seen. So this is sure to be an intense case. However, honeys, that was not the only lawsuit we heard regarding regarding Christie's last week, another collector has gone after them for the sale of a Picasso owned by a cocaine kingpin. The Brewer Management Corporation alleged that the auction house misrepresented the provenance or the ownership history of the Cubist portrait Femme dans un rocking chair, Jacqueline, 1956. In this suit, filed on July 21st in the UK, they are saying that the auction house failed to disclose that the previous owner of the £14.5 million or $19.7 million Picasso painting, Jose Mestre Fernandez, was a convicted cocaine smuggler. The suit reads in part, quote, "The defendant's misrepresentations about the ownership and provenance of the painting were positively misleading and also had the effect of covering up the potential that it could represent the proceeds of crime," end quote. The corporation had bought the work through a representative and collector by the name of Sasan Gandahiri in February 2023, with a third-party agreement basically saying they would buy the work if no one else did, then resell it to another party for a higher amount. Then, no one stepped up to buy it from the corporation, so Gandahari started looking into things and found out about Mestre Fernandez. More specifically, that he was not dead, as implied by Christie's, but rather had been convicted and imprisoned in 2014 for trafficking via Barcelona's port facilities. The lawsuit claims that these facts rendered the painting, quote, unsaleable or only saleable at a substantial discount, end quote, and is aiming to rescind the original agreement with, as well as payment to, Christie's. Last week also saw U.S. Senator Ron Wyden seek a probe into MoMA trustee Leon Black's Epstein ties. The Democratic senator from Oregon, who also sits on the Senate Finance Committee, called on the Internal Revenue Service to investigate what Senator Wyden described as, quote, suspicious transactions involving alleged tax planning work performed by Jeffrey Epstein, end quote, for Black, totaling $158 million in a letter to the IRS submitted on July 31st. Black is widely considered one of the world's top art collectors. He's appeared on Art News' top 200 collectors list annually since 1997, and he was a former chair of the board at the MoMA, but left the position as the Epstein proceedings continued. Wyden accused the IRS of having, quote, failed over the course of many years to audit major tax transactions involving Epstein, end quote, because these charges far exceeded, quote unquote, expected compensation for tax planning services, the letter alleges. The senator called for the IRS to supply more information by September 1st. Black had previously been the subject of Epstein-related investigations because of, in part, his own actions. He was accused in 2023 of raping a minor who had a developmental disability in Epstein's townhouse, as well as 2 other accusations of sexual misconduct. He's denied them all, and prior dealings between the two. For example, in 2020, he wrote in a letter to shareholders at the investment firm that he co-founded that he and Epstein had engaged in, quote, estate planning, tax, and philanthropic endeavors, end quote. A following investigation the next year found that Black was not involved in Epstein's criminal activities despite those, quote unquote, suspicious transactions between 2012 and 2017. We'll see what the IRS decides to do here. In a bit of good news, however, the controversy-ridden Documenta has gotten its first all-women artistic team. The Guggenheim Museum's deputy director and chief curator of the event, Naomi Beckwith, recently named her artistic team of writers, educators, translators, and curators for the 2027 event opening in Kassel, Germany in June that year. They are Carla Acevedo Yates, Romy Crawford, Myra A. Rodriguez Castro, and Xiaoyu Wang. Beckwith's own appointment followed a restarted selection process that followed the heavily scrutinized 2022 edition of Documenta. The entire selection committee resigned before Documenta 2027 could even name a curator in protest of Israel's war in Gaza. And as our sources note, quote, Documenta was criticized by free speech advocates earlier this year when its organizers instituted a new code of conduct that conflates anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, end quote. We're hoping that this artistic team, the first all-female one to lead Documenta since the event's founding in 1955, is able to restore some repute, some peace around this event. And especially because Beckwith is the first Black woman to lead an edition of the show, as well as the second ever American-born artistic director. The first was Carolyn Kristov Bakargiev in 2012. Last week also saw the White House bashing Smithsonian museums and exhibitions as quote-unquote woke in a newly released bad list. The White House appeared to denounce a range of artworks, shows, exhibits, objects on view at the Smithsonian Institution in an article titled President Trump is Right About the Smithsonian, published to its website on August 21st. The article specifically listed institutions and objects, artworks, etc., focused on topics topics such as race, transgender identity, and immigration. In the words of Art News, he, quote, once again attacked the National Museum of African American History and Culture for displays about, inner quotes, dominant white culture, and inner quote, something he had already singled out in an executive order earlier this year. So we see, honeys, the president continuing to rage against this museum network, which is so concerning because, as University of Massachusetts Amherst history professor and Smithsonian expert Samuel J. Redmond told the New York Times, quote, this is an unprecedented pressure campaign and the granularity here is shocking. This list, even from a cursory look, is cherry-picking various examples from an enormous and diverse museum, end quote. And our last lawsuit story for the week, a new one has condemned a pro-slavery message in a North Carolina monument. A group of Black residents organized under the name Concerned Citizens of Terrell County sued the county's Board of Commissioners for maintaining a 1902 monument bearing a statue of Confederate States Army Commander Robert E. Lee, as well as the inscription, and I hate that I have to even say this out loud, quote, in appreciation of our faithful slaves, end quote, and which currently stands outside the Terrell County Courthouse. The concerned citizens argue that it harbors a, quote, textual endorsement of the institution of slavery, end quote, and are pursuing this one instead of any of the dozens of other Confederacy glorifying statues in front of North Carolina courthouses because of that particular inscription, which, according to court papers, the plaintiffs believe is, quote, the only courthouse monument in the United States of America to textually express a racially discriminatory message, end quote, and as it is on public property, that would be a violation of equal protection enshrined in the 14th Amendment. The case is now moving forward in the courts after a federal judge in the Eastern District of North Carolina dismissed some of the claims in the case, but allowed the plaintiffs to continue challenging the constitutionality of such an inscription on public grounds back in May. A bit of a pick-me-up headline here for the honeys. Recent data shows that art history majors may be in more demand than computer scientists. New data from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York shows that in 2023, recent art history graduates had a lower unemployment rate than their computer science counterparts, 3% compared to 6.1%, which was a sharp reversal from the year before, when the numbers were 8% for art history majors and 4.3% for computer science majors. That federal report always reflects a 2-year lag, so that part isn't surprising, but obviously the percentages are. The bank found that all in all, nearly 47% of degree holders in the discipline work jobs that don't require a college degree, but those rates are also down from data released last year when it reached its peak of 62.3%. It's now closer to the national average of 41. The same report found that anthropology majors were facing the worst jobless rates, while graduates in civil engineering and healthcare fields were pretty much set to go. The popularity of this headline came about after the New York Times highlighted the surprisingly high unemployment rates among computer science degree holders earlier this month, of course to the surprise of many, but Hyperallergic writes that while art history graduate rates of unemployment are comparable to fields like biology, advertising, criminal justice, quote, these figures don't necessarily mean that art history majors are finding jobs within the industry, end quote. And one highlighted possible explanation for that is the post-pandemic boom then retraction. Quote, as of August 1st, Indeed job postings in the arts and entertainment category were down by 24.2% from their February 2020 levels, a decrease even from the previous year, end quote. Furthermore, economist Alison Shrivastava, who works for Indeed's research offshoot, told our sources that some variations in relevant factors may be at play by industry. She said some of the decline in the technology jobs likely has to do with overhiring in 2022 and changes brought about more recently by AI, or expectations of really cushy 6-figure developer positions that might convince computer science graduates to hold out for quote-unquote better jobs. Art historians, however, might be quicker to accept a lower income due to our industry medians. So as someone who has worked with these changing job markets and been in that position of job hunting as a fresh new graduate, I wanted to report that there is growing hope for us at this time. And our final story for the day, honeys, Sotheby's is set to sell Eddie Van Halen's guitar for $2 million US. The custom-built 1982 Kramer guitar will hit the auction block in October as the headliner for the firm's inaugural Grails Week in New York. This is a new sales series aimed at essentially making Sotheby's the center of the pop culture collectibles boom, and it has an estimate of $2 to $3 million US. The iconic instrument was first given by Van Halen to a guitar tech and later later sold to Motley Crue's Mick Mars, who recorded parts of the band's 1989 album Dr. Feelgood on it before it was retired from view 40 years ago. So this is a pretty notable collector's piece. That's all we've got for this week, honeys. I do want to leave you with a little note that I myself am taking a tiny Labor Day vacation to go see some college friends. Shout out to Laura, Carly, and Ashley. So just a heads up that because of travel time, how long it takes to record and edit, your Tuesday Beesness will most likely be a Wednesday Beesness. But I'll be back as soon as I can. Remember to, in the meantime, hydrate or dehydrate. Take care of yourselves. We'll talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugnout. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.